Peace, family. It's your brother Marc Lamont Hill. You are listening to the Classroom and the Cell podcast. It's your brother once again, Marc Lamont Hill, and I am joined by
Mumia Abu Jamal.
Brother, it's so good to hear your voice, man. We got a lot to talk about today. Of course, Israel had a very busy week on Thursday and Friday of January. That's Thursday, January 11th, and Friday, January the 12th. They were dealing with a hearing in the International Court of Justice. South Africa has taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, of course, with support of other nations like Turkey and Jordan and other nations around the world. And the first day was South Africa making its case for how Israel had satisfied the conditions of genocide, and they sort of echoed and amplified what they wrote in their powerful application. And then the second day was Israel mounting its defense. But before we get into that, I just want to send just condolences, peace, and love to the family and the friends, the comrades, and everyone who knew the great Sekou Odinga. Just a few minutes before beginning this recording, I received notice that Sekou Odinga, one of our most treasured freedom fighters, has returned to the ancestors. I just told Mumia this moments ago, so I don't want to make you process this on the
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
I don't want to make Mumia respond to that right now. I'd rather just, but I want to at least again send love to everyone who knew Sekou. I knew Sekou. I loved Sekou. I saw Sekou recently. I spoke to Sekou recently, and he literally gave his life for the liberation of black people. And we must never, we can never, we will never forget all that he meant to us. But let's talk a little bit about the International Court of Justice. Israel was taken to court, Mumia. What do you make of that?
Well, unexpected, extraordinary. I think it's unprecedented, especially the charges. It is one of the ironies of history that the country that owes its creation to the violations of human rights against Jewish people in Germany and in Europe in the Second World War now becomes a defendant in international law and charged with committing genocide against another people. So it's kind of an ironic turn. And I watched PBS yesterday, and of course I can not speak or understand Hebrew, but according to the commentator who did the report, soldiers were shouting, "There's no such thing as innocent Gazans," or words to that effect.
Right.
They were singing it, and they were recorded, singing that song. And like when I've always spoken of the Palestinians as kind of the Indians of the region, the indigenous people of that part of the Middle East. And when you think about songs celebrating the destruction of a people.
This is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
Few people can do it better than Americans when they're singing about, when like military troops were singing about going to war against the Indians and the Indian wars. And when I talk to people about that, I usually use I say, I want you to finish my sentence. And they say, okay, what's the sentence? And I said, the only good Indian, and everybody, I don't care if they're teenagers or elders like myself, they shout, a dead Indian. I'm like, where do we get that?
Right.
How does that pop in our minds almost like we're finishing, a prayer, a song,
Yeah.
because it's in us. It was inculcated in us as children.
Right.
And that is that same reality there in Israel. And it's being realized in real terms by the vast destruction that Gazans are suffering in the name of war. And that's why it's more than a war against. It's not a war against a group. It's a war against a people, and
Right.
that should be established without question. I'm told that in their brief, they several pages were devoted to actual quotes from members of the government, expressing genocidal thoughts, and not just the destruction of the people, but population transfers or a shift of Gazans from outside of their indigenous national territory to some other country in the region. So if that ain't, genocidal, I don't know what is.
Yeah, same. It's interesting to watch Israel mount its defense, which to me wasn't nearly as sophisticated or thoughtful as I would have maybe expected. I knew they weren't going to. They're not right. They're not on the right side of history with regard to the genocide. So they weren't going to persuade me, but I expected some stronger arguments. They did make a fairly decent argument, making the case that the Israeli politicians and officials and voices who are calling for genocidal practices don't count in the case for genocide because they're not part of the war team. They're not part of the executive branch of the government. In other words, they might be saying it, but it has no impact. So it doesn't speak to the mens rea or the guilty mind of the state. The problem with that argument, because I think that's a decent argument, I actually think it's a good argument. The problem is you got Netanyahu himself talking about, remember Amalek of the Old Testament, talking about, if they attack the nation of Israel, when Amalek attacks the nation of Israel, Israel responds by killing, men, women, children, donkeys, everything, everybody.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's not just dissident voices or random voices or marginal voices in the Israeli state who are saying this stuff. It is the Israeli state and its stewards saying this stuff. And I think you're right. There is a tragic irony that many of the laws, particularly international laws around genocide, the conventions on genocide, all of these things were created in the aftermath of the Holocaust because the Nazi Holocaust was one of the most horrific moments in our modern history, if not in all of history, in terms of a genocide. And as you said, the nation that then emerges out of that, although I would contend, and I think history contends, that Zionist movements and the formation of the Jewish state, precedes the rise of Hitler. It would have happened anyway.
Right.
But the Nazi Holocaust was an ugly, awful tragedy, an awful crisis, an awful act of genocide. And we created laws to prevent genocide, and now the very nation whose experience with genocide occasioned these laws is now prosecuting a genocidal war on Palestinians. It's stunning. It is sad. It is disappointing. I think the question for me, and I know you're somebody who has studied the law for a long time, and I love your book Jailhouse Lawyers, which gives us a lot of insight into how the prison itself becomes a space for these types of legal investigations and analyses, etc. If the ICJ holds Israel accountable, or rather finds them guilty, that is its own kind of accountability. But I guess the question for me is, do you have any faith that a guilty verdict, as it were, will matter, that it will do anything?
Okay. I'm going to answer that question, I think, and I hope succinctly, but also as clearly as possible. What we're seeing now is kind of the dead end of nationalism gone mad in a way, right? And if you look at what's been happening for almost a century in that area, it gives you a sense that international law is kind of another form of politics that has no real application in the real world, on the land, in the lives of the people. Or else we wouldn't be talking about occupation. Occupation is an illegal act. It violates international law. But countries that want to do it because what is the cost? I don't put any, really honestly, any faith in the ICJ, and I think it would be premature to do so, And if you look at their history, it seems like the only countries and leaders that can be prosecuted by ICJ are African leaders. You know what I mean?
Right. They call it that. They used to call. I know the ICC. They sometimes call it the ACC, the African Criminal Court, because that's the only people that. It's the only people they seem to get.
Exactly. Like only African leaders violate international law. You dig? And
right.
you know. So I mean, I think it'll be unprecedented again. But you know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and you know, we shall see if they really believe in international law, like what they say and what they do. You know.
Yeah, I'm not.
Believe the misery of the Palestinian people. Will it finally, you know, get them out of a situation of like occupation where your mortal enemy controls your water, your food, your everything but your air?
Everything. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one, man. I don't see it happening. You know, I think that the ICJ verdict matters because the world is paying attention in a way that it just hasn't before. In seeing an objective international body make the case that Israel is guilty, I think will open up some eyes. But Israel will continue to make the case that the ICJ is anti-Semitic, just like they say the United Nations is anti-Semitic. They say Amnesty International is anti-Semitic. They say anybody who holds them accountable, they say is anti-Semitic. And so they're going to say, we're not going to allow Hamas to kill us because of the ICJ. And so we're going to keep prosecuting this war, even though ultimately it's not against Hamas. It's not even against, Palestinians in many ways. It's against oppressed people everywhere when we start to create these precedents for being able to engage in ethnic cleansing and depopulation and flat-out genocide.
You have 1 minute left.
So it's like you said in your recent book, it's the exception, right? The exception to the rule, and the exception, the Palestinian exception.
Always, it's except for Palestine, man. Well, look, we're going to keep watching. Our eyes will be peeled, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed. We're also going to keep our fingers typing. We're going to keep writing and thinking and organizing. We're also going to keep struggling in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters and people all around the world who are standing up for the liberation of the oppressed. And shout out once again to South Africa for this unprecedented, as Mumia said, and historic gesture. It is more than just a gesture. It is a legitimate strike for freedom. Mumia, it's so good to hear your voice, my brother.
Always, always. And again, blessings and salams and a salute to the fallen soldier, Sekou Odinga.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Love you, Moo.
Thank you for using Securus. Goodbye.
All right, everybody, you have been listening to the Classroom in the Cell podcast with Marc Lamont Hill and, more importantly, Mumia Abu Jamal. Make sure you check out all of our episodes. You can go to the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. Check out all the episodes with me and Mumia. You can also check out other content on the page, including the full proceedings of the International Court of Justice hearings on genocide against Israel. You can see day 1 and day 2 on the page. You can also read my legal critique of Israel's argument, and you can check out other content on the page. Just hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and if you're so inclined, hit the join button, and you can become part of what we're building here on the channel. Salute to Sekou Odinga, salute to his family, salute to his friends, salute to his beautiful children in particular, salute to everyone who loved him and who struggled with him. He is our hero, he is our brother, and he has returned to the ancestors. But we can say, job well done, soldier. Job well done. Ashe.